Hello, everybody. Thank you for listening. The inextricable link between societal value and engineering, embedding ethical consciousness in practice. I've spent the last 15 years writing in this area, supervising students in this area, and I'm hoping that I could share something of value to you during the session. So the outline of my presentation is as follows. I want to state up front that my view is that all knowledge is contingent on your beliefs, which is embedded in your worldview. In the introductory remarks, I mentioned some statements which I believe to be axiomatic. It's important for the rest of the presentation that follows. I then mentioned the developments that point to the need for a new framework for ethics in engineering. We look at some of the current practices in ethics in engineering, especially at the curriculum level. Then propose some elements for the framework, and I borrow these from systems thinking based on my own work. And then I offer two examples of how we can embed ethical intentionality right at the start of an engineering project. So I would not cover any philosophical constructs or ethics. This is best done by the experts and when more time is available. We live in a moral society. However, each human being has multiple vested interests would lead to tensions in society. Every moment of our personal and professional lives, we make choices that range from the simple to the complex. As engineers, we carry a double responsibility with respect to ethical choices. We carry our own individual conscience and vicariously that of society in our engineering interventions. So what do we do when we are confronted with ethical choices in our planning and design in a complex engineering project? A greater challenge, I guess, would be to ask the question, what do we do when we are confronted with ethical dilemmas where all the choices seem unfair, but you have to engage in action? I believe that there's a need for a more comprehensive and useful framework for ethics in engineering. And these are based on the following. We are now beginning to see the full implications of what we mean when we talk about socio-technical systems. The old practice, and perhaps still very much the current practice, is that we focus more on the technical than the social. And yet, it is not a system if we do not give equal attention to both socio and technical. We look at the grand challenges, and if we look at this in the light of the Sustainable Development Goals, then the implications for ethical decisions and ethical considerations is huge. There's a dire need to address environmental issues. We see this daily in our lives. We see this daily on the news channels. Then there's Industry 4.0. What are the ethical implications when we now want to make machines to act as human beings? Capitalism, neoliberalism, or the single economic criteria of shareholder value poses some dilemmas for engineers. This is not new. This has been there ever since we had engineering, I guess. There are large portions of our world that are still developing, and the legacy engineering practices which are rooted in imperialism is no longer credible. So what has been the emphasis on ethics thus far with respect to engineering? Well, we've had the good philosophical teachings such as virtue ethics after Plato and Aristotle and behavioral ethics. We still have the codes of conduct and regulations by professional boards. You could see, for example, the 8 canons of the American Society for Civil Engineers. We have some institutes, such as the South African Institute of Civil Engineering, mention values such as justice, equity, well-being of society. All of these make a valuable contribution to engineering practice, but this is post the training of engineers and very much thou shalt not. I have 2 questions. The first, Is there a way of ensuring rigor in the early stages of the planning and design in engineering projects that compels the engineer or the team to make independent ethical judgment? And how can we announce the CDO approach to intentionally incorporate ethical considerations? So I take some elements from systems thinking and systemic ethics, and these are underpinned by Kant, Churchman, and Habermas. So there are three commitments in critical systems thinking. One is critical awareness. We need to evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of the techniques and methodologies that we use. We also have to examine very carefully the assumptions and beliefs that influence our design. In emancipation, we need to be aware of the power relations and how we mitigate these power relations, because at the end of the day, our engineering intervention must lead to improvement. Then we are not going to be able to do this with a single approach in engineering. We need to embrace knowledge from different paradigms across different disciplines. But we need to do this in a coherent theoretical manner. All this leads to really boundary judgments and how this relates to promoting improvement. This is a key to any systemic intervention, which is what engineering is all about. And by the way, boundaries for the resolution of complex problems have to be negotiated. Otherwise, the result is the right solution for the wrong problem. So we will talk more about these in the actual seminar itself or the webinar itself. But I just want to run through this in the next few minutes just to show you two examples. The first one is stakeholder theory from Banville et al. So what the group has done is categorized stakeholders into three different types. And you might have more, but these are the most important I consider. We look at the standard stakeholders. Most of you would be familiar with this. Those that's affected by the engineering activity or could possibly be affected. We look at fiduciary stakeholders, those that act on behalf of clients but are not necessarily affected by the design. But here's an interesting one, silent stakeholders. What about preserving or contributing to the life of the next generation or those yet to be born? Now, when you engage in this exercise, you can see immediately how the notion of boundaries come into your problem context and how you're going to be confronted with a whole lot of ethical choices that you have to make. But engaging with the stakeholders in various, using other techniques, which is not for the discussion here, starts to deal with those ethical dilemmas. The other example is critically-heuristic boundary questions, which I've used quite a bit with my students and in real engineering projects. And these pertain more to complex problems. So this is based on critical systems thinking by Ulrich, and it provides an instrument that allows us to really examine closely the choices we make and the approach we take to our design. So it proposes the OT mode. So for example, who ought to be the systems client? That is, whose interests ought to be served? And I should switch immediately to the is mode. Who is the systems client? That is, whose interest does it actually serve? And if you go back to the OT mode, look at the last one, who ought to be the witnesses to the interest of those affected but not involved? That is, who should argue the case for those who cannot speak for themselves but may be concerned? And if you look at the is mode, who is the witness to the interest of those affected but not involved? We will talk more about this in the seminar. But you can see immediately this raises a whole range of issues, and it really gets us to think about what we are doing and whether we have been comprehensive enough in approaching our design, and whether we considered as comprehensive enough the ethical issues that we have to take into consideration. So for now, I would leave it there. I look forward to the presentation. and I will unpack a whole lot of these during the question and answer session. But for now, time is limited, and I need to sign off. Thank you very much.